Okay, the next idea that I want to talk about is thinking more about your compositions. Now, composition is absolutely key to photography in general, and especially to street photography. Because with street photography, we have that ability when we're out shooting in public spaces to play around with our compositions and try to get creative. We can use composition as a way to draw our viewers' attention to different things within our frame, to play around with how our viewer perceives the scene that we're looking at, and to provide visual interest for our viewer. So, what you need to think about first is to play with the elements, play with all the different elements within your frame. So, within any given situation, there are going to be different elements. When I say elements, I mean like the people, I mean the inanimate objects, maybe animals within the scene. These are what I classify as different elements. So, it's about playing with those different elements within your frame to make an interesting composition. So you want to keep in mind also where you're putting your camera. So now, obviously, most people will just take photos from eye level, which for me is I'm about 5'10", so it's normally about that level. But you don't actually always have to take photos from that level. You can get low, you can crouch down, you can actually use the flip screen on your camera, get your camera really low on the ground, or maybe put it in some bushes, try to get some foliage in the foreground. You can get to a higher viewpoint. You can go on a bridge, you can go up some ladders, you could even be shooting with a drone. You can use all of these different perspectives to make your compositions more interesting. You don't always have to shoot from eye level. So don't be afraid to experiment with your compositions. Don't be afraid to experiment with your angles. So let's have a look at a few examples of pictures that I've taken where I've tried to change my angle to make things look a little bit more interesting for my viewer, to change that viewpoint, to change the way that my viewer is perceiving the scene. Well, if we look at this first image that's on screen, you could see that I was playing with a kind of a lower angle, looking at this lady's legs with the tree trunks on the side, and with the colorful handbag and the shoes as well. It just created a really interesting and kind of confusing perspective in this scene. And that's sometimes what you can try to do with some of your scenes. You're trying to get your viewer to think a little bit deeper about the situation, to kind of confuse them, to surprise them. That's what great street photography can do. In this image that I took in Lisbon in Portugal, you can see that I changed my angle to make for a more interesting composition. The two people were dancing in the street in the background. And by crouching down and kind of getting closer to this wall on the left, you could see that I framed the two people using the door frame created by this alleyway. And also by tilting the camera a little bit, I offset them to the right, which kind of created these leading lines on the left from the wall that led you down towards the doorway and then to the couple in the background. So all of those things combined made for just a really interesting composition. Let's have a look if we've got any comments. Oh, okay, we've got the next one up. Okay, so here in this scene, you can see that I'm using multiple different people within the frame. So in terms of composition, what I'm trying to do is fill the frame with different people here. So I'm drawing your attention to different points within the frame to try to make a more interesting composition. Because sometimes you just want to have one single focal point or maybe a couple of focal points within your photograph. But also one good technique is to sometimes to fill the frame. And if you can do that with, say, people, you give your viewer multiple points to look at, like in this image where your eye is drawn across different parts of the frame as you look at all these different faces and the position of the children. And again, in this situation, I was walking through the streets of, this image was taken in Cadiz in southern Spain. And it's just a scene where the children and adults are out playing together in the street. And I just happened to be walking past and just noticed all these people together, kind of in this position. And I thought it would be a great scene to try to get an interesting picture from. And so I was quite happy with how that kind of turned out. But again, like I mentioned, you don't have to just look at lots of different elements with the frame. You can simplify it down to one or two, maybe look for surprising and interesting scenes like this one that I took in Jakarta in Indonesia, where you can see this chicken walking along the road. That's not a joke, walking across the street. But in on the left-hand side, I paired it excuse me, with a woman walking past. So you've got this interesting juxtaposition of the woman and the chicken walking past one another. The chicken's feet and toes splayed out, and you can see the woman's feet as well. And so it's kind of a really interesting and surprising um, pairing there that makes your viewer stop and think about what's happening here. Why are we viewing it from this angle, looking downwards as well? So I'm playing with the composition. I'm trying to make it different. I'm trying to make it less obvious, because that's what we want to do with our compositions. We want to create unique, compelling images that are less obvious for our viewers when they're looking at them. So my top tips for playful compositions are to be aware of all the elements within your frame. Think about what's happening in the foreground, the middle ground, and the background, like the image that I just showed you of the group of children and adults sitting in Spain. Be aware of what's happening on those three different levels, and on the left side of your frame, the right side of your frame, and how you use your frame to capture all those different elements, because that all adds to your composition and the power of your composition. Point to change your position and don't always shoot from eye level. Like I mentioned before, get low, get high, experiment with putting your camera in different places, and try to do something different. Try to do something new. Find a new angle that can add something different to your photographs, and just create something a little bit more special, a little bit more unique, a little bit more surprising for your viewer. But finally, the final point, don't be afraid to experiment and make mistakes. Like I mentioned before, professional photographers, we only show you our hits. We don't show you our misses, but there are a lot of misses, especially in street photography, because everything is happening so fast and so much is unpredictable. Don't be afraid to experiment and take lots of pictures until you feel that you've got that one from that situation. All right, so let's jump back into your comments and questions. Let's see if we have any questions that have come through. Okay, we've got Liam. Hi, Sean. How often are you still working assignments? Your photography is really great. I'm just wondering, in a saturated world, how often the great photographers are still getting opportunities? Okay, that's not directly related to street photography, but it's a good question. Yeah, how often are you still working on assignments? Well, it varies really. Assignments kind of come very sporadically. As a professional photographer and photojournalist, that's one of the things, you never really know when you're going to get assignments. That's one of the difficulties of being a freelancer. But these days, it's hard to say each year. I mean, COVID was a tough time. I think most photographers around the world saw assignments dry up. But since everybody got through COVID and we got past COVID, then things have started to get back to pre-pandemic levels. So every year can be different, really. I'm balancing assignments that I get from magazines with my own personal projects, like I mentioned, which are about climate change and environmental issues. Many of those projects, I'm either working with magazines that I've contacted to pitch ideas to, or they're approaching me about stories and ideas that they have. but it really varies month to month and year to year. Okay, let's see. Next, we've got Saro Studio. Good evening from Tamil Nadu in India. Okay, welcome, Saro Studio. We have Mozam Hussein, who's tuning in from Florida. Nice to see you here, Mozam. We've got Louise tuning in from Spain. Okay, we've got another one from another person from Spain. Thanks for tuning in, Louise. Okay, let's see if we've got any other questions here. Liam says, don't be late and at F8. Okay, that's a little bit of a variation on the F8 and B there. I haven't heard that one before. That's quite good. Don't be late and at F8. I might incorporate that one. It was quite good.